Hey, what's up, guys? This is Teo Hayashi. Welcome to the Teo Hayashi Podcast. This is our 23rd episode, and I have the honor on our 23rd episode to have a conversation with a man that is so deep, so profound, yet has such a reach. So I'm talking about Bishop and Dr. Mark Chironna is in the building. Dr. Mark Chironna, welcome to Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'm just going to briefly intro Mark Chironna for those that don't know who he is. He's a bishop. He's been doing international ministry for the last 5 decades. He holds 2 doctorates in Pentecostal theology and also in semiotics future studies, which is a very interesting topic in itself. We'll love to talk a little bit about that. He is a local church pastor and overseer of networks of churches, and just a man that every time I get around and we talk about the prophetic, the apostolic, I mean, not only is my heart on fire, my brain is exploding. So I would love to share this conversation with you. But before we get into this, don't forget, give us your like, give us your comment, and share. If this is benefiting you, if this is blessing you, it'll bless other people as well. Comment. We want to hear what God is speaking to you through our podcast, and give us a like. That'll make the algorithm get you more content similar to this. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Dr. Mark Chironna, thank you for making time to have this conversation with us. Just so happy that this actually worked out, and hope you had a good flight over and that you feel rested. And we're super excited to what God is going to be doing this weekend.
It's great to be with you. It's always great to be here, and it's great to be able to talk about what Jesus is up to and where he's going.
That's right.
It's important.
I think you get the privilege of doing this for decades, whereas I am kind of new at this. See the Lord move across the nations. And I know you've been traveling for so long. I've recently came back from a trip to Asia. I was so encouraged to see what God is doing out there in one of the most unreached nations, Japan, my motherland. And I just came back with so much hope of revival in that land. I know you're in America, but besides America, what are you seeing the Lord do and move across the globe?
Well, there's no question. The center of gravity for the church has shifted to the global south.
Wow.
South America, Asia, Africa, all has moved in that direction. And the future belongs to people that are fully embracing the fullness of the Spirit, both within Pentecostal charismatic circles and denominations, as well as Catholic charismatic circles. That's where the future is. People are hungry for life in the Spirit. The disenchantment that has characterized much of modernity has actually worked against the philosophers of the Enlightenment, because what they tried to kill, they only made a stronger urging amongst the younger generations for truth and for the experience and encounter with God that you can't get those in books. You have to have that personally one-on-one with Jesus, right?
That's
and that is essential. And I would argue that is the future. And you're right in the middle of it here, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, well, we recently had a shift of popes, a transition, have a new pope coming in. I find it interesting you mentioned the charismatic Catholics. So much of us Protestant Christians are just within our own bubbles, which I totally get it. We're so large. How do you see even like the charismatic move amongst the Catholics with this new pope? Is this new pope more open? Do you see that there's a bridge that could actually be more, built between the Protestant and the Catholics?
So I was, I've been a bishop in the church since 1998, but I was consecrated into the International Charismatic Communion, which had its roots in the relationship between Pope John Paul XXIII and David Duplessis from South Africa, who was known as Mr. Pentecost.
Yes,
and there came a moment when, over the course of their conversations and their love for one another, that Pope John Paul strongly felt like there needed to be some expression of unity as we move forward into the future. There's a lot more conversations going on between well-respected leaders in Pentecostalism and within the Catholic communion higher up about, do we ever get to the unity of the faith? Now, for all the differences, and there are many, there are serious conversations going on. I've been blessed to be a part of a few of them, but something is happening. And I would argue that if we go back to those early conversations centered somewhere around Vatican II and David Duplessis and the Pope, what came out of that was the International Charismatic Communion of Bishops, beginning here in South America, and then in America and in Africa, and large reach of churches, and the ongoing conversations, and they're growing. And there is this, most of us that grew up Pentecostal, grew up despising the Catholics and misreading Revelation, making Revelation say things it doesn't say, because we fundamentally think we know. A lot of the trouble, I'm just going to be honest with you from a theological perspective, a lot of the trouble we have in current church is misreading Revelation from a Johnny-come-lately perspective and not understanding it from the ancient perspective of what it meant to the early church, and what apocalyptic literature is, what it's designed to reveal. But that led to, in the 20th century, hatred by Protestants toward Catholics. And I grew up in a generation that if you told me I can't, I'm going to do it because you told me I can't. I'm not allowed to fellowship with Catholics. But my problem was I had a lot of Catholic friends, and
you're ethnic background.
I'm Italian, right? And
like Italian Americans, my I would say majority Catholics.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Even though I was Protestant, and so I had family, I had friends, I had loved ones, I had relationships, and I discovered that when you really get down to it, while there may be areas of disagreement, there's a lot of areas of agreement. And when you put the conversation around Jesus, you actually can have fellowship.
Yes. So correct me if I'm wrong. So what I hear you say is the ICCC, which is the International Community
of
Charismatic Churches, actually came out of this
conversation
between David Duplessis and John Paul.
And John Paul said, we will acknowledge the communion.
Oh, wow.
And you will become part of that which we acknowledge as bona fide. You just can't we wear the red, you can wear the purple. So our vestments are all purple, but we are deeply tied in the spirit of unity. When we think about unity, unity is not uniformity.
Yes.
And if we can remember that the confession of the creed, who the Father is, who the Son is, who the Spirit is, if we agree on that, we can have all sorts of conversations about what we don't agree on, but if we can agree on the creedal formation, who is the Father, who is the Son, who is the Spirit.
Talking about the Apostles' Creed.
Or the Nicene Creed even, as it developed. So you had the old Roman Creed, which was developed within the first 2 or 3 years of Pentecost. So they have which was a baptismal creed. It was what you had to know to be baptized. And then as things formalized within the early church, they realized, so we don't want to baptize people right away. We want to make sure they know who the Father is, who the Son is, who the Spirit is.
Yes.
And so they began to develop catechism classes, which even in the early church eventually, became 3 years long.
Wow.
And it was
that long.
Yeah, that long. And during that,
to get baptized.
Yeah, because they wanted to make sure you knew who you were and you knew who God was, and they wanted to make sure that there were no unfinished business, that all the deliverance you needed got dealt with before you got in that water.
Which is interesting to think. How would modern churches today see a baptism class 3 years long, right?
Yeah, well, because it would deal with where are the demonic strongholds in your life? What's your unfinished business? Do you really know who the Father is? Let's talk about your relationship with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Baptizing them into the name of the Father. That it's not just the formula for baptism. It's being baptized into the life of the Godhead. What does it mean to commune with the God who is Father, Son, and Spirit in his very being? And that's experiential. That's mystical. I mean, as Pentecostals, that ought to get us excited, because we are not ashamed of talking about the fact that we experience Christ. We believe in the God who personally reveals himself to us. Wow. And that is at the core of why we unashamedly embrace the Spirit who walks with us, talks with us.
Yes.
And makes us to know who Jesus is, because his whole purpose is to disclose the things of Jesus. And then in that, we get to know who the Father is.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, you touched on something. I'm just still stuck on the 3-year baptism class.
Yeah, we live in short attention span theater now, right?
Exactly. But one of the things that I see in Brazil, and not only in Brazil, but I just see this across even the Western church, and I would love to hear your comments on this, is what we would understand as an altar call to salvation. And a lot of times, the altar calls to salvation that I'm hearing, I'm thinking, this isn't, I mean, you're not saying anything that isn't true, but I mean, I think we should maybe make it a little bit more clear. What is the gospel?
Yeah.
And so my concern is church growth, with people saying, I'm being saved with that call to salvation, when I'm thinking it doesn't really contemplate picking up your cross and dying.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do we go from there, and what is that effect? Even as we're looking at, you mentioned this, the global South, numerous churches, I mean, church growth. But then I would also question and critique my own people, saying, yeah, we have a multitude of people, but let's question, what kind of gospel are we believing in and buying into?
Listen, great question, important question, crucial question for where we are right now in the church. My generation was the generation that embraced church growth, and that came with a mixed bag of goods, to the point where we now have in America the McDonaldization of the church, fast food franchise church, which has totally compromised taking up the cross, following Jesus, spiritual formation. What does it mean to be baptized into the triune life? You know, much of contemporary evangelism has its roots in a baseball player that got saved and then had meetings in tents where the whole reason for the music was to get people wound up,
Billy Sunday,
and then preach to them that they're going to hell and make them feel so guilty that they come to the altar and they pray this prayer and we guarantee their salvation. Well, a prayer doesn't guarantee anything. A prayer, it's wonderful to pray, and I'm not saying we shouldn't pray, but I don't have the authority to tell you you're saved. Only the Spirit can tell you you're saved. So the moment I tell you, you prayed that prayer, you're now saved, that's actually theologically really false. Only the Spirit can give us the witness that we
testifies to our spirit.
We are the sons of God, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. And so we can't reduce salvation to what we would call decisional regeneration if we look at this faithfully theologically. There does need to be a moment where we become aware all of this is coming together in a moment of convergence. But we've made an effort of wanting to make it as easy as possible, when the reality is that Jesus says, come and die.
Wow.
Come and die.
Wow.
The cross is not... Bob Mumford told my generation, if you get close enough to the cross to kiss it, you'll get a mouthful of splinters. And we have forgotten that.
Oh, wow.
So Jesus died...
Can you say that again?
Yeah. If you get close enough to the cross to kiss it, you'll get a mouthful of splinters.
That is powerful.
And so what we now have is Jesus died so you could have it all, so you don't have to take up your cross. He suffered, you don't have to. And anything you want, God will give it to you. And that's patently false. It's not the gospel at all.
Wow.
And in America, that's what we have unfortunately seen the fruit of, and people have left the church by the droves. But the fastest growing segment of the population in America, that's the reason for new church growth, are the Gen Zers. Churches are exploding now because the young people who are disenchanted, disillusioned, battling major psychological trauma because of what they've been raised in. When they hear well-informed pastors talk about the reality of what Jesus can do to make them whole, they're having encounters with Jesus. It reminds me of the Jesus People movement when I came to Christ in the early 70s.
Would you say that there is amongst the Gen Zers this quest, this search for truth?
Absolutely.
More than just an experience?
Absolutely.
Whereas maybe my generation, millennials, or the generations past,
cerebral.
It was very,
cerebral.
Yeah.
But truth, okay, so truth is relative because truth is a person who's my elder brother.
Jesus, yep.
That's what makes it relative.
Gotcha.
It's that he is a person.
It's a relationship.
It's a relationship. And he's my big brother. He's not just my high priest, he's my elder brother. So I'm related to him. And so that when I say truth is relative, I'm not talking about enlightenment thinking. I'm saying let's use that word relative in a way that is faithful.
I get it.
Jesus is my elder brother. He's my high priest. He's the apostle of our confession. But he loves me enough to say, I went through what I became as you are, so you can become as I am.
Wow.
And I know the path you're on, and I'm going to join you as you yield to me so that every step of the way you don't have to go through it alone. And I will never fail you, and I will never forsake you.
That's powerful. Now, with that, you've mentioned in the West or in America or even in the West, I would say, because I believe in the UK they're seeing the same thing in terms of the Gen Zers coming back to church. When we look at that, we also see a lot of scandals, which is kind of like, for me, it's odd, right? You're getting a lot of young people that would probably be the first ones to be critics. Yet they're coming to church, they're committing their lives to Christ, yet we're seeing so many scandals. And of course, there is the social media, time we live in, and so we publish the scandals. But as they're walking out this faith in the midst of scandals, what do you see in terms of, you see something amazing, something not good, but we're walking towards the future? Let's say the Western church in a decade.
Okay. The Western church is on life support. I'm not saying as a whole, but in terms of the church growth movement, back to the McDonaldization of the church. Okay. So if we go back to 2002, famed sociologist George Ritzer wrote a book about this thick, I've read it all, called The McDonaldization of Society and the Fast Food Franchise, all based on the brilliance that was coupled with bad ethics of Ray Kroc, who ripped off the McDonald's brothers,
they made a movie with that.
Yeah, I mean, and he was not the most savory character, but the ends justified the means. And I guess Teo, I've lived long enough, and I've been in enough circles with the preachers. Toxic systems produce toxic leaders, and when the goal for a preacher,
they begin well, but because that ecosystem corrupts them.
Yeah, because get it as big as you can. You're no longer dealing with human beings. You're dealing with individual percentage units. Get them in as fast as you can. Get them out so the next service can come in. All of that. So here's what happens. Especially, let me be real careful, but let me just talk about men who are driven to succeed, have high ambition. When they reach whatever they think they're going to reach, or they don't reach it, when that itch doesn't get satisfied, all that energy is going to go somewhere. Guess where it's going to go? Control, sexual abuse, and all sorts of unhealthy things. Because men that are unharnessed, that probably shouldn't be in the ministry anyway. And listen, we also have, as Pentecostals, we should be the first to say women are equal, and the Spirit is no respecter of whether you're a male or female. You can preach, you can pastor, all of that. But we're still dealing with that even within Pentecostal circles. And I personally, your mom was an apostolic figure. So whether people want to argue with that or not, my roots are latter rain. Your mom came out of the latter rain, right?
Exactly.
There was an understanding. The Spirit is no respecter of male or female. So when mom got to heaven, do you think Jesus said, you really shouldn't have been doing what you're doing, but I guess I got to reward you for what you built in Sao Paulo. I mean,
I think we just lost our reform crowd. They just lost
well,
off.
good.
Right now.
Yeah, well, that's not bad either because neo-reform doctrine is built on the falsehood of certainty about everything.
That's it. Oh, say it.
There is no such thing as certainty when you come to the God who is mystery at his very being.
Wow, come on.
And the moment you have certainty about everything you can say about God, you are now playing God instead of yielding to God.
Come on, preach it. That's it.
So that's a deep concern. But again, that's cerebral. That is not experiential. There are men and women in the reform movement, and some have gone on to glory, that I deeply respect. Mm-hmm. But what I see going on in the reform movement is nothing more than refined legalism and Pharisaism, and it's toxic, it's abusive, and the language is abusive, it is oppressive, and yet there's a crowd that likes to be beat up. And so what is it in people that like to hear abusive language and be put down? Mm-hmm. That's a whole separate issue that we need to address.
It's a whole dysfunction right there.
Absolutely.
But you were talking about so we're talking about the McDonaldization of the church.
Yeah, and John Drain, Cambridge theologian, in 2012 took the work of Ritzer, 2002, and wrote the McDonaldization of the church. And critiqued
so it begins with this book on society.
On the whole culture.
10 years later, this other gentleman shows up with a book on church.
Yep.
And so what is his prediction? What is your prediction to the future?
Well, at the end of the day, all of it has to be challenged and deconstructed.
Sure.
There will be a future for people that embrace that, but it won't be related to what Christ is doing. It will not be what Jesus is up to. It will be another form of the gospel that will not resemble genuine Christianity from the ancient faith. It will be an entirely different brand. And I'll call it a brand because Christianity is not a brand. Jesus didn't brand himself, but we've now got all this branding stuff. That will become something that moves further and further and further away from the faith once for all delivered to the saints.
Wow. So when we're talking about, the future, one of the things that kind of struck me, a few months ago, I had conversations with some church leaders in the missiology world. Mm-hmm. And they were telling me, Teo, you know that America is still the mission force, number one mission force. And for a long time, South Korea was the number 2, and Brazil was number 3. And it's been, I would say, 3-4 years that now Brazil has surpassed the number 2, surpassed South Korea. And so they're saying, we really see that what used to be the mission field becomes the mission force, and what used to be the mission force becomes the mission field.
There are many missionaries coming to America to preach the gospel from all over the world.
That's crazy.
And so when a missiologist wants to argue that we are still the strongest, I want to say, okay, as a theologian, I want you to look at why that is, which are the mainline denominations, and look at those mainline denominations and see their aging populations and see how they're trying to hang on by a thread because young people aren't hanging out with them. So what's driving the missiology from America?
Wow.
Because it will not last if there's not a radical paradigm shift.
When you talk about radical paradigm shift, what would you suggest that be?
Okay, so here's the biggest problem. Again, let's go back to church growth, okay? And I was a part of that whole thing. I know what it's like to build a mega church. I built one.
So let me just clarify. When you say church growth thing, is it like the Young Cho influence? Or
Totally different.
Not what you're talking about?
No.
Are you talking about seeker-sensitive movement?
Yes. Okay.
All right. So the Bill Hybels, the
fast spiritual food. Okay. Get them in, get them out.
Okay.
Jesus Light, like Bud Light, Jesus Light.
Yes. Okay.
That has produced far more disenchantment and disillusionment. And we have discovered that even when that happens in Pentecostal churches, those are toxic systems that have toxic leaders. And the end is not yet. We are going to see far more. Okay, so you want a prophetic word?
I would love that.
Okay, Ezekiel, 30 years old. He's taken as part of the first group of deportees to Babylon, right? He's supposed to be a priest, but he's in Babylon. He cannot do what he was born to do. Jeremiah is still back in Babylon. Jeremiah sees firsthand the destruction of Babylon. Ezekiel is there ahead of Jeremiah. He sees it in vision form. And Jesus, the Lord, high and lifted up on that mobile throne, the living creatures. This is the
wheels,
one like the Son of Man. This is the pre-existent Christ. Right? He calls him into prophetic ministry because he's sitting with the exiles. He's worthy of prophetic ministry because he sits where the people sit.
Wow.
If you can't sit where the people sit, you've got, and he was trained to be a priest, which means he learned how to talk to God on behalf of the people before he learned to talk to the people on behalf of God. You cannot talk to people on behalf of God claiming, thus saith the Lord, if you have not first had a burden to bring them before God in intercession.
Come on, there you go.
So he doesn't realize he's been set apart to be a prophet. He's the son of Buzai. He's part of the Levitical priesthood. So he's been formed and shaped from childhood to pray for the people, to care for the people. That's first and foremost. Every prophet has to be a shepherd. And right now, we've got a cottage industry called Prophetic that is anything but shepherding. It's drop a dime and I'll prophesy. Pay me $1,000, I'll give you a word. And we've turned it into an industry that has nothing to do with the spirit of prophecy. And we've prophesied everything else but the cross-shaped life. Because the testimony of Jesus, materia, is the spirit of prophecy. In other words, the moment you divorce anything you prophesy from the cross-shaped life, it is, I don't care if I tell you you're going to get $1 million. What's it got to do with the cross? If it doesn't bring me back to the cross and the way the cross is going to change my life, you can rest assured it's not the Spirit of God speaking.
Wow.
I don't care how flourishing it sounds. I don't care where the rhetoric comes from. We have this ability to make ourselves sound like we're anointed, when in actual fact, we're annoying.
This is good. This is good. Yeah. You quote the testimony of Jesus as a
Revelation 19.
The original. You said
materia, the witness, the martyrdom of Jesus. The martyrdom of Jesus. The whole book of Revelation.
It's the same word in Acts 1:8.
Yeah, and we're called to be martyrs. Living martyrs. Now, we're not going to all shed our blood, but the one whose robes were dipped in blood, right? We've got a warrior Jesus now in a lot of the proclamation of the gospel, but this warrior has a sword in his hand and he's killing people that disagree with him. Wow. We've weaponized the gospel, but the warrior Jesus that rides a white horse doesn't have a sword in his hand. He has one in his mouth, and there's no battle because when he speaks, it's all over. God doesn't need a sword in his hand to eliminate evil. All God's got to do is lift his hand, lift his voice, and it's all over. The testimony of Jesus, the martyria, the cross-shaped witness of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So in the Greek, there are no capital letters. And there are no commas. So if you're going to study Greek, you got to realize, okay. Context is everything. So spirit of prophecy there is not small s, and there's no capitals. It's capital S. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Irenaeus of Lyon. The Father has two hands, the Son and the Spirit. In the economy of the triune God and in the economy of mission and salvation, the Father has established Christ as the Son who ever bears witness to the truth, and the Spirit as the one who reveals him. So what you have in the revelation of the cross-shaped life in Jesus is that the Spirit backs that up and says, this is what the prophetic is all about. So if you're going to prophesy, and the cross is absent from the very way in which you prophesy, and there's no evidence of the burden of the Lord in relationship to taking up the cross, I don't care what you prophesy. If Jesus is not the center of that conversation, I question the prophecy.
Wow. Which then pushes me to ask you, how do you see today the prophetic landscape in America or the charismatic church in America? Because I'm speaking from somebody that has actually, I would say we've gleaned from that. Last 20 years, 25 years, and I'm looking in the last maybe 4 or 5 years thinking, what has happened?
Okay, so both of my doctorate degrees are tied to prophetic perceptuality and prophetic integrity. I'm deeply concerned about what has happened in the prophetic in the last 30 years. I came up in a day where I was formed and shaped by men and women of God that said, if your heart's not pounding, you better not prophesy. And what you say is not predictive. It's not prediction. It's not foretelling. It's forthtelling. You are here to proclaim the revelation of Christ.
Okay,
And
so let's, because for us, the audience and myself, foretelling versus forthtelling. When you're saying foretelling, you're saying you're gonna bring a provision of the future. When you're saying forthtelling, you're gonna create the future through the utterance. Is that right or no?
Okay. So, when we look at the ancient prophets, much of what they prophesied was not predictive. It was justice for the poor, love for the marginalized, love for God, love for your neighbor, you name it. They were the plumb line. They were God's prosecuting attorney.
Gotcha.
When the people of God forgot what it meant to be the people of God.
Wow.
Well, today prophets don't rebuke. Well, if a prophet, a true prophet, sees the condition of the church and keeps quiet, what are they going to prophesy? What tickles people's ears? See, we want our ears tickled. But when Samuel was raised up, ears were tingling because he was exposing things, right? Now, I'm not saying prophecy is for edification, comfort, and consolation. Yes, the simple gift of prophecy is for edification, comfort, and consolation. But the Ephesians 4 prophetic for the prophet, they're like, if the apostolic voices come and tell us how to build the church on the foundation of Christ, and church planters start building them, and the prophet comes in and says, you used 2x4s here, and you should have used 3x4s. You didn't build this right, because they're going to check the foundation.
Wow.
But we don't talk about that anymore. Right now, it's what's my ministry going to be, which is fine. But again, and I came up and was formed within a context of the good side of the latter rain. So I've had personal words spoken over me, but they've always been tied to what Christ is doing in my life. I've prophesied personally in presbytery with others over thousands of people in my many years of ministry. And it was in that tradition that I prophesied. I watch now, and it's become a cottage industry. And it's like the more dramatic, devils know things about people.
Yeah.
They're called familiar spirits. I'm not impressed with somebody that can tell you the address you live at. That doesn't tell me anything about the cross. Doesn't tell me anything. Just because I give you your address, what does that have to do with the testimony of Jesus? Nothing. That's a wow effect, but it is not. And the man who used to do that we've heralded was a pedophile and a member of the KKK. The man we claim as the hero of all that from the 1940s was involved in pedophilia and was a member of the KKK. All the great men and women of God that I know from that generation walked away from him. Even Gordon Lindsay walked away from him. But we've turned him into a hero because prophets have to be able to zero in and tell you what color your underwear is. That's nonsense. If I look at Teo and I endeavor to minister to Teo based on the Spirit of God, I'm probably going to pick up on something of your history. If I don't know you, my first is going to be, where's he come from, Lord? Show me. And I'm going to find out something about your history in relationship to your mother and why it was that God chose to form you from the consciousness of a woman of God that had a pioneering spirit. And then I'm going to ask God, where are you? Because a word from God is a word, the eternal God, we think past, present, and future, but that's all now for God. God blinks his eyes and you are in your mother's womb. God blinks his eyes and you are at the day of your death standing before the Lord. And everything in between is held right now perfectly in the arms and hands of the eternal God. He knows it all, beginning, and he knows you better than you know yourself.
Oh, for sure.
So if I get a word, all I get is one little glimpse of something. What I want to be able to do is reveal as best I can what the Spirit is disclosing to me about what he's already shaped and formed in your heart, so that when you hear it, it doesn't sound like a foreign language. It resonates with something already at work in you, because I'm not here to tell you what God said. I'm here to confirm what God already is saying to you so that you can hear it from someone else who can say, this is why you're wrestling with this, so that you can say, that's God. I've been wrestling with that for a long time.
Wow. That's powerful. That is so powerful. So going back to the prophetic in the future, and we have Gen Zers watching this saying, you know what, I don't know much about the prophetic, or maybe the examples that I've seen aren't like you've expanded on biblical. How would you do prophetic ministry 101 or prophetic ministry for dummies explanation to people that are watching us?
But that can't happen in 5 minutes. They would need, we have to slow down to the speed of life and slow down to the speed of revelation.
It's too rushed. Everything is too
rushed. If people really wanted to learn about the prophetic, I would say, give me 3 years, because you don't know what you don't know. And once you do know, it's going to take you 15 years to master that body of knowledge. This is not instant, because here's where we have failed even in terms of discipleship, because discipleship is communal. It's not individual. And discipleship is about discernment, personal and communal, and discernment takes time. I can take you to the stories of the Desert Fathers from the 4th century. One of them was wrestling with God speaking to him about seeing someone in the city, because, they moved out to the desert because of the compromises. And it wasn't like they were running away. They wanted to face the demonic in their own lives, the temptations, and overcome them, because there was just people succumbing to the demonic and to temptations in the city. Well, one of them, who was very prophetic, one of the Desert Fathers, had heard from God that he was to eventually meet with this person, and he prayed and prayed. It was 4 years later that he finally went. It took that long to discern what God was asking him to do. And what we want, God, give me a word right now. I want to prophesy. No, sit down and shut up and learn how to wait on God. Elisha is getting ready to take off his servant's coat. He's going to rip it off in grief, but he's going to put on the coat that he has been grooming and removing the flies from and keeping clean on his master Elijah. And they go from Gilgal to Bethel, Jericho, and all the guild of the prophets that are there, they all can tell him, don't you know?
He's going to die.
The Lord's going to take your master. So I've got a prophetic word. He's going to depart. Yeah. And they know it by the Spirit. And here's what, in the Hebrew, this is what he says. I know. Practice watchful silence. What he's really saying is, you think you know something, but that's not the issue. The real issue is you're not going to be there to receive the mantle. I already know that mantle is mine. I already know he's leaving today, but I also know the price it's going to cost to put that thing on and what I'm going to lose in order to say yes to that. And what you haven't learned with all your thinking hanging out with Elijah that you could prophesy is that you don't understand everything he got from practicing watchful silence. All you guys want to do is sit and prophesy. You don't know how to stay quiet long enough in God to discern what God is saying, why he's saying, and then the wisdom with which you're supposed to deliver it. Practice watchful silence.
That's the Hebrew word for that. That's amazing.
Be still. Practice silent watchfulness. We don't do that. We want to run out, and we have this idea that everybody can prophesy. That's not what Paul says. Even with simple, that's false. When it says everyone can prophesy, this idea that means everybody. No, in those congregations, there were 2 or 3, maybe 4 that were inclined toward that. When he says everybody can prophesy, it was those that are actually inclined to that, not everybody. And I know the people that teach that. I've got receipts, 2 doctorates. I've gone really deep into this. You don't want to play with me, because I will deconstruct your false argument. No, everybody cannot prophesy.
Wow.
Everybody cannot prophesy. That's false. That's a misreading of that text. It's a fundamental misreading of that text.
So when you're talking to young people that are interested in the prophetic, what would be your advice? Watchful silence.
Let's learn how to practice, we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are changed into that same image from glory to glory. Let's talk about beholding. Let's talk about being still and knowing he is God. Let's talk about all the things you think are impressions from God, but are just your own psychological projections because you have a need to prophesy instead of a need to steward the silence.
Wow. That's very anti-modern culture.
Very much. very much. And
it's counterculture.
it is.
That's awesome. That's really good. Well, there you have it. Contemplation. Sit in silence. Practice the presence. It reminds me of that book, The Practice of the Presence of
Brother Lawrence.
Brother Lawrence. That's awesome. So there you have it. Another episode of the Teo Hayashi Podcast. This one was a conversation with Dr. Mark Chironna. I hope this has blessed you. Keep plugged in. Subscribe to our channel. Keep your heart on fire for Jesus. I'll see you on the next one.